Welcome to Healing Through Play Therapy podcast, where we explore a wide range of topics related to children's mental health. I'm your host, Sylvie, an experienced certified play therapist. Today, we have a very special guest joining us, Mike, who brings valuable insights into today's topic. Mike, the Barefoot Broker, was diagnosed in the top 1 percentile for ADHD severity in his early 30s, which is around the time he launched his 2 companies. Through the support of a very understanding wife and loads of trial and error, he thinks he has found some cool tricks that help him with his ADHD. 3 years on, he is in profit and getting ready to launch a new mission. Welcome, Mike, in our podcast, and thank you so much for agreeing to have a chat with me.
Thank you very much for having me. It's very exciting. Most people don't talk to me about ADHD, but talk to me about other things, so this is really cool for me. Thanks for having me.
Well, it's definitely very helpful for me and for other therapists and parents to hear your experience. If you could talk a little bit about your experience living with ADHD and how it shaped your life so far.
Where to start? I mean, if you get diagnosed late in life like I did, you have this weird moment where you go back over every single moment of your life and kind of relive it in the context of a new understanding of ADHD. One thing that I heard a lot as a kid was must try harder, or Michael's great, but if he just applied himself a bit more. Things that never made any sense to me whatsoever. There's a lot in the diagnosing process that kind of makes life a little bit easier to just be in when you when you get the label. I know I'm not a big fan of labels, but when you get the ADHD label, you have a bit of an aha moment. You go, oh, right, okay, I get it now. Everything makes sense all of a sudden.
Do you have any behavior or red flags thinking back when you were a child that you think, okay, now this makes sense and now I can understand that? For example, if you were fidgety in the school or if something triggered you very quickly.
I spent most of my time stood outside of classrooms. I kind of had this ability to just absorb information from a classroom environment without following any kind of structure, which I think made me a lot more disruptive. Always used to be loud and noisy and interrupted like all the time. But I think it's quite important, really, for people to be aware of the things that don't get said very often, which is perpetual self-doubt as an 8-year-old little boy thinking the entire world and everybody in it existed for the purpose of making my life miserable. Like, it's those dark thought processes that aren't explained to children and can't be rationalized. I used to sit at the end of my bed crying my eyes out because somebody had said something mean to me. And I just thought it was a normal part of growing up.
I actually hear that from loads of clients who have ADHD, that they really struggle with this. And I do wonder if you could give them a little technique to help them with this.
By no means am I the authority on how to deal with ADHD, but I do live with it and I live with it quite severely. And one thing that I found really helpful is almost to try and separate thought processes between me and my ADHD. So I have a little check-in process, like in the morning, sometimes I wake up and it's just a bad day. So I check in with myself. Is it really a bad day? Is it real? Because there's kind of like this noise that's created in the ADHD-ism that can tell you things that aren't the truth. Like, your wife doesn't love you, you're going to have a terrible day at work, all these things just appear uninvited. I have this kind of check-in process, and my wife's been amazing throughout the process in helping me with this, because I'm a hard person to live with. Difficult to be around. I understand that. Some people love me for a minute. Not many people love me for a lifetime. Realizing that in your own head there is a constant dialogue between 2 versions of your brain, I find that quite helpful, because it means you can rationalize yourself against the ADHD to make yourself feel better.
So growing up with ADHD, how did it change your life? Did it make it more difficult? Do you feel it's a gift or a bit of a curse or both?
I haven't actually written a book yet, but I've got the title of my book, and that will probably answer quite succinctly, because the title of the book that I would like to write is called Life, the Torture of Being Brilliant. Because absolutely ADHD has some superpowers attached to it that allow me to be the person that I am today in the context of everything else going on around me. ADHD helps me as a business owner. In the context of growing up, ADHD is not helpful, particularly if you don't know that's what it's called. It's pretty rough. Like, Just for anybody that's actually listening and wants to know a little bit about my schooling background, I didn't complete A levels. I never went to university. I left school because I broke up with a girlfriend and ran away out of the country to go live in Cyprus and become a scuba diving instructor. I did everything that I possibly could to not succeed. But thankfully, I've always had a big caring heart and I always cared about people. So I found myself in job roles that allow me to look after people. And because I'm quite good at doing that, I've got a business that has clients now who I love to pieces, every single one of them. And it's only in getting older and understanding now what it is and how it impacts me that I've been able to turn it round into something that's a positive. But for a lot of time, it wasn't. And children, if you're listening, everything's going to be fine. I promise you. You're going to be all right. Don't panic. It's all good. Because I wish someone would say that to me often.
Can you tell me a little bit about your challenges that you're facing? You can start from your childhood as you started in the school, but what about friendships? What about studying and fitting into social groups?
Wow. You just kicked me back about 20 years there. Social groups and fitting in. It's a weird one, right? Because ADHD can mask so well and fit into every single social environment. But the truth is, the person that I relate to most in the context of engaging with other people are those depressed comedy actors that have since ended up committing suicide, because to be the funniest man alive but feel like you've got no friends is kind of what it is to grow up with ADHD. Because I always say to people, it's like a pattern, right? We can see patterns. It's not that I see the Matrix or I'm Rain Man. It's just the world operates in an order and I've learned the order of it. So I don't become dysregulated. Flirting was the biggest thing to get my head around. Like the social interaction between two people when it comes to the context of romance is complicated when your brain works differently. I have no idea when flirting happens, or it's just weird. And that is kind of the best way to describe living with ADHD as a kid, because you have all of these interactions with people and you collect all this information from the world around you, but none of it really makes sense because kids are mean. I was a fat ginger kid at school. Like, I had no chance. I was a fat ginger kid and I had ADHD. Like, I was just like loud, annoying, and generally a good time for a short period of time, but then I'd do something stupid like throw something on a bonfire that was going to explode, and all of a sudden Mike needs to go home because he doesn't know how to play out properly. It's not fun. And I don't know a way to make it better.
It makes me wonder how your parents try to help you or understand you.
Well, look, I was born in 1986, so little boys were naughty in 1986. They weren't diagnosed with ADHD, unless they were really, really naughty. And I think because there is such a wide spectrum of neurodivergency, I think I'm really lucky in the sense that I've got very severe ADHD, but I also feel quite intelligent with it. I kind of feel like if there was a big old box of playing toys with like neurodivergency in, I feel like I got the good ones.
Can you explain a little bit more about what you mean severe ADHD, just for people who are not aware of the spectrum?
There's 3 different types of ADHD. I tested in the top 1 percentile for severity across all 3 different types. So there's the type that everybody knows about, which is little boys type, which is like hyperactive and naughty. Then there's the introverted type, where all of the hyperactivity happens inside of you. And then the combined type. To get a positive diagnosis for ADHD, you need to qualify a yes answer to 6 questions out of 9 in each one of the 3 categories. I got 8 out of 9 across the board for easy maths. I think what that means for me is there's just all of the symptoms are sort of a little bit worse. Like if I'm having a meltdown, I'm really having a meltdown. If I'm hyper-focused, I'm really hyper-focused. But there's some people I know that maybe wouldn't even get an ADHD diagnosis, but still demonstrate some of the symptoms. And the absence of a diagnosis and understanding about the chemical impact on the brain and all sorts of cool stuff like that, you're never really going to know how to be your best self, which is why, for me, talking therapy is like mega. I tried pills, by the way, and they were terrible. Diet and talking therapy is revolutionary in the combat against ADHD.
Can you talk about a little bit about your therapy experiences, how long you've been having therapy for, and what you have achieved with therapy?
I've been around the therapeutical process a lot because both of my parents remarried therapists, which was fun growing up. But now, as a grown up married adult man, engaged with therapy both for my relationship, for business coaching, for ADHD specific stuff, for just general emotion stuff. And I've worked with loads of different people. I think that breaks therapy for people with ADHD or makes it difficult to get your head around is you kind of feel like you're supposed to get something from it. And actually, a lot of the time, I just talk absolute nonsense for an hour. And there'll be one part of the conversation where I'm just like, okay, yeah, that's a better way of doing that. The beautiful thing about the therapeutic process is I know if me and you are having a conversation, I'm safe. I can tell you absolutely anything and know you have got me. And I don't have to try and figure out all those little different parts of the human experience that I don't get. I don't have to try and figure out whether or not you mean what you say. I have to try and figure out whether or not you like me, because at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter. You have a skill set where if I talk long enough, you're going to make me feel better about myself. And I think that's the big thing that people that are neurodivergent miss with therapy, because of the way Hollywood has projected the therapeutic process through movies and TV shows. But the truth is, lock yourself in a room and just start talking. And eventually, your life will be better. My life has become inherently better since I've done therapy. I can't do enough at the moment. I'm doing like 4 or 5 hours a week and loving it. And I have been for my entire adult life up until about 6 months ago, dead against therapy in any way, shape or form. I've been converted.
Well, I'm glad to hear that your therapist is very helpful, but I think it puts a good perspective on the fact that children sometimes need therapists to help them to understand what ADHD is, or just to understand themselves a little bit better.
The simple fact is, if you're an adult that is either undiagnosed or not affected by ADHD symptoms, if you have a child with ADHD, trying to understand what they're going through is practically impossible. My wife's a very intelligent woman and she's very high up in her career. I've tried a million different ways to explain certain elements of how ADHD feels, and it is not an easy thing. Two intelligent people having an adult conversation about it, it's a difficult conversation. Trying to get a kid to explain rejection sensitivity dysphoria, get a 3-year-old to explain that to you. It's not going to make any sense, but what it means is anything that you say at any point in time to that child could be taken in the worst possible context, and will likely be taken in the worst possible context. So you haven't done very well today, young man, might actually sound to a kid, go and kill yourself. And I'm sorry for that strong, but that's the severity of what we're talking about. That's how it feels inside if you get a little bit of criticism. Just making people more aware of what it's like as a kid through people like me telling you what it was like for me as a kid. Maybe that's helpful, I don't know.
If you could tell one thing or a few things, what would have been very helpful for you as a child?
I think kids are a lot luckier now in the sense that there's more people talking about this stuff. But as a kid, there's a lady actually that I work with who's my nutritionist. If I had her as a child sat next to me all the time, everything would have been fine. The rest is talking therapy and a tiny little bit is medication. So I would say get a nutritionist.
Can you talk a little bit about the diet? What do you follow, just out of interest?
I've had a massive revelation on diet recently, and it is the culmination of 4 years worth of conversations with medical professionals across every kind of arena. But basically, the biggest thing for me was removing gluten because, and I don't know the science on this, but the information I've got from all the different people, gluten makes the intestines more porous. If they're more porous, more poison can get into the blood. Blood goes to the brain has a meltdown. That's the simplified logic. I stopped having gluten 6 weeks ago. I've dropped 10% body fat, 6 kilos in weight. I'm healthier, I'm lifting stronger, my golf game got better, my body looks better, my face looks better, my wife loves me more, and I'm the most regulated version of myself in the world ever. I really think it is the biggest misunderstood element of neurodivergency is the connection between the brain and the gut. And it's what I've learned through my nutritionist.
I think more and more people start to understand the diet and mental health and the relation between those two. So I have seen more people actually changing diet when they get diagnosed or just generally speaking.
Yeah, it's really fascinating. Just the difference in the things that it removes, things that like perpetual self doubt, rejection, sensitivity, dysphoria are all so much more regulated in the absence of gluten. I don't know why. When I actually went and had a conversation about medication, it was my psychiatrist that said to me, Mike, you can do this with talking therapy and nutrition. They were the two things, and I absolutely am an advocate of it. And the nutrition doesn't make sense without the therapy, because you've got to actually turn up and have the conversations about doing the thing that you don't really want to do and go through all those painful parts of, well, do you know what? I don't know why I keep eating rice and chicken. I want to eat pizza. And you have to have someone there to bounce off with you to make sure you're always following it, because everybody with ADHD has started something one time. Not many of us have ever finished it. When you're trying to create change, you need to have someone who can tell you pretty to the point, hey, look, don't do that. That's bad. Do this instead. And I think that's where ADHD gets the most amount of help out of therapy, in my experience.
What would you tell children who've been diagnosed with ADHD? What advice would you give them?
I could get myself in trouble here, because my immediate response wants to be ignore everything that your teachers ever tell you, but I don't mean that. What I mean is get it in your head that it's on you to figure out how you best function. 96% of the people on this planet are not going to understand you. So you figure out you. And if you need someone around to help you do that, okay, no problem. But really start to focus on what it is to live inside your body and find a way to tell people what that feels like, because that really is going to help you the most.
What would you tell parents who have children who've been diagnosed with ADHD?
Kindness will save you from a lot of tantrums. Kindness, patience, and acceptance of the fact that whatever you think is right in the context of your brain, it's probably not right in ours. And the other big thing, parents, is do not ever argue with a dysregulated child. You will not win. When you are dysregulated, the mission is dopamine. Dopamine's a drug. So I am going to push you to the absolute edge of your nervous system to get one little hit of dopamine. So if you see a tantrum, stay calm, relax, know that it will pass, because it will. Always does.
What would you recommend to schools to have children who have ADHD?
It's so difficult, because I don't think schools, teachers, children's or therapists for that matter have a particularly easy job when it comes to neurodivergency, and trying to find something that fits everybody is impossible. I think the whole planet would benefit from a deeper understanding of what it's like inside and how much of the world doesn't really make sense. And I say that in that way, not because I'm an idiot and the world doesn't make sense to me, but to try and give you an idea collectively of, imagine just walking around on a planet you'd never been to before with all these rules about how you should be with people, and then having to learn all of those rules so you can fit in with those people, because it kind of feels a little bit like being an alien on a planet where nobody understands you. That's what it feels like. So anything that a school environment can do to lessen that feeling would be beneficial. And I think that really comes from education, understanding, and if at all possible, hearing from people who have lived through it. Because I figure we can tell it the best, because I've been through the process of tears and tantrums and crying and punching holes in doors. And yes, I've been a dick, I've been arrested, horrible things have happened in my life. I've been a horrible person, I've been a nice person. All of the spectrum of ADHD, and at almost 40 with a few grey hairs appearing, I think I've cracked it, more or less.
Do you have techniques that you use on a daily basis that really helps you?
I was wondering whether or not I should tell you this one. So I was given some amazing advice, and I don't know why it works, but it does. And that is brush your teeth on one leg. It's got something to do with the fact that when your brain's thinking about balance and it can't think about anything else, and 2 minutes for brushing teeth is a long time, get bored quickly, or brain starts spinning on other things. Lift one leg up, amazing. And that's great, right? As a kid with ADHD, my mum walked up to me and said, Mikey, brush your teeth on one foot today. And then all of a sudden, everything in my life felt a little bit better. I'd probably keep doing that. The other massive thing is cold showers. Cold water at the end of every shower, every single morning. And that's about discipline. Motivation is fleeting. Discipline is the thing that will get you going. And on the back of the cold shower, that is the starting point, because it's only 10 seconds of your life. And if that's the worst thing that happens today, then we'll probably be all right. On the back of the cold shower, that's when you start building your other good habits. Get up, eat good breakfast. Protein, 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 all the time. Exercise 2 to 3 hours a day. go out. Use all the energy that you've got, however you can. When we were kids, we used to just run out of the house and disappear for 13 hours at a time. I know it's not as easy to do that now, but be active, always. And make sure you give yourself a bit of downtime.
The most difficult time in the school, what I have noticed, is the transitioning. What advice would you give to the school and children for that?
You know, that's quite interesting because I'd never really thought about that. But a lot of things change between little school and big school, as we used to call it. At little school, your whole day's planned out for you. And all you have to do is just follow instructions, which actually, right, ADHD loves routine.
What I found, like my clients who have ADHD, they get into trouble most of the time when it's transitioning from one classroom to another, or when it's free playtime on the playground.
Truth to be told, that's probably because there isn't enough playtime and free time. If the rule was get up and do an hour's worth of running around in circles for an hour before you do anything else in the day, probably wouldn't be so bad during the playtime environment. To put it in a context that adults would understand, right? If you take me to a pub quiz, I am not having a good time because I am going to a place where I know I can potentially have a good time, except I've got to be quiet, listen, and think. All of those things I don't like doing on purpose. I like them to just happen. Classrooms are the same thing for kids. I have to sit still. Are you joking? For an hour at a time? No, that's not fun. So all of this energy just builds up and up inside and the brain starts whirring and nobody can listen to anything. And then they open the door. Of course, freedom. I need to go and hurt someone or something and get all of this frustration out of me because you just forced me into this tortured environment that I never, ever, ever feel like I can get out of. So the second the door opens, see you later. Let's go cause some chaos. And I don't think adults without ADHD understand that chaos is the place where we really come alive, right? So as a kid, I'll create chaos so I can feel peaceful. So if you see chaos, what I'm asking for is peace. So give me some peace. If I was exhausted before I went to school, it wouldn't be difficult. And actually thinking about it for myself, I used to swim 7 or 8 times a week with a club when I was at primary school and the early part of junior school. And I really think that probably helped a lot with me being regulated at school. And I don't know if finding out if I had ADHD would have made it worse, actually, at the time. I honestly don't know. Yeah, that's a tricky one because making us sit still for so long, giving us a short amount of time to get from one place to another before we have to sit still again. Like, surprise. Thing is, I'm laughing and I know I shouldn't, but I'm laughing because it is so obvious that that is the worst way to do that for an ADHD kid. If you know what we know and you have a massive room filled with ADHD kids, there would be no chairs and desks in that room at all. Everything would be like some kind of sensory, pleasant stimulation. Everyone could stand up, sit where they want, move where they want. The chair that I have in my desk is a fidget chair. I've got so many gadgets to make sure that I can just be functional at work, including these headphones, which are noise cancelling because they have to be for me to pay attention. They're the things, and this is, it makes me so frustrated. Like, you've identified that every time that there's a transition from one classroom to another, that's the most likely that not only are your kids going to be dysregulated, but other children are going to be impacted by their dysregulation. Make it a long walk. Give everybody that's got ADHD 20 minutes to get to their class. I know it doesn't work practically, but that's how you've got to be like, okay, you've got 5 minutes to get to your next class and you need to go tidy up all the basketballs in the gym before you get there. Go. That's how you get them to do it. But no one's gonna let them do that because health and safety and a million other things that just make it impossible.
But that's exactly why we're raising this question, how we could help the school change the environment that better suits and fits for ADHD children so they get dysregulated less.
I've got a sales coaching business that I run alongside my insurance brokerage. And one of the things that I make a point of doing when I'm coaching groups in a boardroom environment is if I see someone with attention slipping or if I see a yawn, I tell all of my guys, get up, leave the room, go for a walk. And I do that because I know what it's like to sit in those classrooms where you'd like falling asleep all the time. I remember sitting at my desk every single day between the hours of 2 and 4 o'clock, I would start feeling tired and I had no idea why. And I would get pulled into my manager's room and be like, Mike, are you not getting enough sleep? What's going on? Okay, now I know that the rhythms of our body work slightly different. It's completely normal for me to want to go to sleep at 2 o'clock in the afternoon being someone with ADHD. Like, that's actually what should be expected. But my life experience has been, why are you doing that? That's why schools, that's not a difficult thing to do. If you see a kid fidget, let them fidget. Tell them to go for a walk. They're not missing anything critical that they can't catch up on in 5 minutes when they return to class, because chances are, if they've got ADHD, they're bright and they can retain information, and they don't need to be there for the long boring bit, because we go A to Z and that's it, it's done. Not A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H. Oh my God, I'm falling asleep. So if you see a kid moving around in class, tell them to move. I would encourage it. I would encourage every single child has to sit through any boring bit of school, in their opinion, move about, fidget. I used to run a wire down my sleeve, and I used to sit with my hand on that, and I used to listen to really, really loud heavy metal. That was the only option. Just have really, really hard music going in one ear so I could listen to the teacher in the other ear. Everything has a fix to it. ADHD kids, with the right encouragement and the right love, that's the very important one. Like, love them to within an inch of their lives, because if you say anything remotely bad, it will be taken in the worst way.
This often comes up during parents' review meeting. My child only sees black and white, so it's either right or wrong, but they don't see anything in between. What advice would you give to parents?
The best way to explain that is don't try and change the observation of right or wrong. Try and understand where the right or wrong thinking's coming from, which is usually, in my experience at least, a painful, deep-seated requirement for fairness. It's a function of ADHD. Everything has to be fair, and neurodivergency in general. And it goes back to the patterns that I explained. If there is an order for something, like buying a bus ticket, stand at the bus stop, wait for the bus will arrive, tell the man where you're going, give him the money, take the ticket, sit down. Everything in the world of ADHD looks like a pattern like that, and if it doesn't fit the pattern, chances are there's going to be dysregulation, because in our experience we have a binary outcome to almost everything, right or wrong, yes or no. I think it's why it makes me a big fan of customer service and the customer experience, because I think that people should get the best service if they're spending money. I would not try and discourage the right or wrong thinking. I would actually put it to parents to change their perception of where that's coming from, because I don't think teaching people about grey area is a constructive use of time as a parent. And I'm not a parent, so I shouldn't tell people how to parent. But I think if you understand why things are only one way or the other, me as well, I'm guided by it. Me and my wife have had some of the biggest arguments on a right-wrong topic, because I can't move past it. And I can't get to the point of understanding another person's opinion until someone acknowledges to me that there is a 1-0 outcome. It's binary. Yes, it could be this or this. Don't try and tell me otherwise, because now you're unraveling all the patterns that I've learned throughout the entirety of my life that allow me to be able to live on this planet. Even if it doesn't look like it's right or wrong, or there's a learning process, focus on the right or wrong bit first, and I'd get them to talk to you about it. Okay, so why is it that way? How do you understand it to be like that? Because there will be an explanation that probably is far more articulate than anyone that I could ever give. Ask a 4-year-old why they think the way they think, and you'll be amazed. I think that's probably the focus there, rather than seemingly changing their opinion of what is right or wrong.
Well, that's helpful, because often this question leads, oh, but my child doesn't have empathy. But I think it's not about they not having empathy, but they have, as you said, right and wrong. And then if they don't see in the middle, people can wrongly assume that ADHD children don't have empathy, whereas they do, but it's come from a different angle.
I recently got given some information about empathy and ADHD, which really changed the way I see myself, because I've often thought, like, actively had this thought process, maybe that wasn't very kind, or maybe there was a different way of doing that. Like, I've checked in with myself on a few things a few times, thinking, why don't I care? Somebody just died, for instance, and the information about that person dying comes to me. Unless it's someone that is very, very close to me, like blood relative from my immediate family, I'm probably not going to have many feelings about someone dying, because it's too far out the scope. And I think that really is where this theory of ADHD people don't have empathy. But actually, I was told it's the complete opposite. We have so much empathy, it cripples us to the point of actually trying to withdraw from the understanding of the emotion because it's too painful. And when it was put to me in that sort of sense, it really kind of changed everything, because the truth is there is no kid that's got ADHD that isn't wildly empathetic. We just aren't taught how to deal with it. All those emotions. Imagine the entire world screaming all of its problems to you all at once, or having 1,000 people inside your mind talking to you about completely different topics. That's what it feels like to live with ADHD.
After talking about the challenges living with ADHD, now I would like to ask if you could tell me what is the gift living with ADHD?
What is the gift? Don't tell anyone. Once you figure it out, you don't have to work that hard to make a decent income. We can create these environments that make us insanely productive if we know how to do it. I don't really have to work as hard as most people to earn the same amount of money, because the way my brain works, which is amazing. And I've actually built a system so I can teach this to people. And I think as orators or educators or anything, I think ADHD is fascinating, because I never know where my brain's going to go. Even during this call, I have stopped myself going, what are we talking about now, Mike? And then all of a sudden it seems to make sense. And it's just really fun. My wife says it best when she's like, you're just like a big kid. I do feel a little bit like Peter Pan. I'm definitely not almost 40. If you go and get me like a skipping rope and something that makes bubbles, I'm having a good time. Like, it's great to live always in the moment, the most immediate moment. The only thing that really matters or affects me any time of day is what's happening right now. Like, the past is never really there because working memory problems, and the future, who cares? Because we'll worry about that when we get to it, because we don't plan anything.
Going back to your childhood, did you have any difficulties making friends or maintaining friendships?
Yes, long and short is absolutely. And this is a really weird one for me, because I kind of, if asked about it, as you just have, I kind of thought I was half popular at school. I know that doesn't really matter as adults, but like I kind of feel like I wasn't a loser, but I don't have any friendships that are maintained from school. Actually, there's like 1 or 2 people I've known for a long time outside of my family, and not many more, because I don't think as a kid with ADHD the friendship thing makes sense, because it's really hard to explain to someone that you just can't be bothered to talk to them sometimes. Like, me having that conversation, like 8-year-old Mike to 8-year-old anyone, sometimes I'm just not going to want to talk to you, because my brain doesn't like people sometimes. Isn't a conversation that makes any sense. And even now, like, I got mates, like my little ADHD buddies, who, like, we speak to each other once every 6 months, despite the fact we'll spend 4 months trying to arrange a phone call with each other, because it takes a month to get a response. And it's fun now. Like, we play with it. And I have to say, since meeting my wife and having the love, like, and huge understanding from her on, she's my go-to for asking questions about people that I don't understand. If I find myself in a conversation that's maybe deemed inappropriate or politically sensitive or whatever, she's my go-to. I'm like, this happened and this conversation happened, and I think I was being a good human, but they think I'm a bad human. So can you figure this out for me, please? And I think if you are a kid listening to this, or parent of a kid with ADHD listening to this, it's complicated, the friendship thing. It's not simple. It's not straightforward. And don't forget, kids are mean. I don't care who you are, children are mean. It's the truth. If kids are mean and you have rejection sensitivity dysphoria, your life's going to be miserable. And making friends on top of that is difficult. And I don't think there is any other way to help people other than to try and say to everybody out there, the 96% of you that aren't like us, sometimes we say stupid things. We're sorry for that. We are. We didn't mean it. Our intention is always good, because we care and we have massive amounts of empathy. We just don't have all the patterns as young people with ADHD to communicate what's going on for us in a way that you understand. So give us a break, because we're trying our best. I think that was what I would say on behalf of all ADHD children. Understanding that there's always going to be a moment in a friendship with someone with ADHD that doesn't make sense to you, where they're going to upset you or say something that hurts you. They don't mean it. They're just trying to be funny and get some dopamine. All angles with ADHD lead to serotonin or dopamine. That's the reason behind everything. It's just chemistry. Give them the benefit of the doubt, those ADHD friends of yours, because they are trying very hard.
We just talked about how it felt for you making friends as a child, and it makes me wonder if you had a therapeutic outlet or a therapist at school, whether it would have been easier for you to make friends. Do you think it would have been helpful for you to have a therapist?
Yeah, 100%. One of the first things when we first ever met, that I thought, when you told me what you did, I thought, that is so cool. I wish I had one of those. Obviously, a few years too late. But yeah, I think a lot of the misunderstandings that kind of are created in the mind of an ADHD child, just trying to figure out the world, right? Because the world doesn't make sense already. Trying to figure that out on your own as a kid means that you end up with a lot of negatives attaching to everything, because you've got no one else to talk to that can make sense of this stuff and understand it. Whereas having been through therapy as an older person now and had the odd little breakthrough, they do exist. I thought they were a mystery, but I have had them. I think in hindsight, having that as a kid would have been completely and utter. I couldn't put any kind of value on that. If I felt like I had a safe space to have a conversation with a human being that understood me between the ages of, I don't know, say 5 and 17, I think my whole life would be completely different. Not that I want for a better life, but I do think a lot of the struggles that I had in my 20s and early 30s wouldn't have been there. When you feel like you're on your own all the time, those things are hard to get in your head. I think having someone that gets you and understands you at the earliest possible point, like the second conversations with a tiny human start sounding like an adult human, and you've got ADHD, get in therapy straight away, because you can stop so much damage happening as a trained, qualified therapist to the mind of someone who is probably a little bit nuts. That's the fairest way to describe it. I would say that about myself. The easiest way to understand me is I'm probably a little bit nuts. In the context of your world, in my world, I'm perfectly normal. Being a little bit nuts in a world that operates in a way that you don't understand, you need someone to talk to. However old you are. I don't jump at the opportunity to speak about ADHD very often, because I think there's a lot of bad information out there. And I think there's a lot of people speculating when what they should actually say is all the information contained herein is for entertainment purposes, because ultimately that's what this is. It's for entertainment. Yes, there's education there, but I'm not a doctor, all right? I'm just a guy that failed a lot, learnt a few things along the way, and has found a way to live with something that for some people is extremely debilitating, and live a relatively good life with it. A much better life than I could have had in the absence of all the understanding that I've acquired. So yeah, kids, talk to your therapist.
My last question. What are your hopes and goals for the future, both personally and in terms of advocating for ADHD?
A lot of the way that I've learned to describe ADHD symptoms is to try and give an example in life that you could relate to. Like, for instance, imagine being stood at the front of a classroom in front of 1,000 people who are all trying to have a conversation with you all at once, whilst I'm trying to have this conversation with you. Because that's the level of stress that can be felt inside the brain of an ADHD person in a one-to-one dialogue. Not always, but it can be. I think it's up to everybody to try and find a way to understand their fellow person. Aristotle said it best. I am not a citizen of Earth. I'm not an Athenian. I'm not a Greek. I'm a citizen of Earth. If everybody applied that mantra, we all live on a big old planet together, and some people experience things one way and some people experience things another way. Can we find a way to understand each other so we can experience more stuff together? Probably. And I think if everybody just gave a tiny little bit more about their neighbour, about the person that they don't understand, and ask questions to get to understand them rather than jump into conclusions. If I can be any part of the voice behind that change, that would mean the world to me. Because I think every single person on this planet, if they look deep, deep, deep down inside of themselves, could definitely say, I could do a little bit better. And I think if we all just did a little bit better, maybe the world might last a little bit longer.
Well, thank you, Mike, for speaking about ADHD. It was very eye-opening and I think very useful, and I hope it will be useful for other parents or teachers or whoever is listening to this episode. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much for having me. It's been a blast.